I was freshly hired as an assistant at the local morgue, a position I had pursued for months. I was eager to prove myself, though a nagging sense of unease accompanied me on my first day. I had heard the stories, whispers about the morgue being haunted. Still, I brushed them off as mere superstition. The morgue was an old, dimly lit building. The narrow hallways felt confining, and the air had a heavy weight that seemed to drain my energy as I stepped inside. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that I was there to do a job and that I needed to stay focused. As I walked through the cold storage area, a shiver ran down my spine. The silence was almost deafening, punctuated only by the distant hum of fluorescent lights. I glanced at the rows of cold drawers, each holding a lifeless body. The sight was unsettling, but I had prepared myself for this. I was determined to be professional, no matter what the rumors said. My coworkers seemed friendly enough, but they avoided certain topics, especially when it came to the strange occurrences that had reportedly taken place in the building. They would exchange knowing glances, hinting at things I didn't quite understand. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were hiding something. As I settled into my role, I kept reminding myself that this was just a job, nothing more, nothing less. Little did I know, the true horror of my new workplace was just beginning to reveal itself. As the days passed, I settled into my routine at the morgue, but it didn't take long for strange things to start happening. It began with the lights flickering unexpectedly. At first, I thought it was just an electrical issue, but then I noticed that it always seemed to happen when I was alone. The dim light would flicker above me, casting eerie shadows along the walls, making the narrow hallways feel even more confining. One evening, while I was organizing supplies in the autopsy room, I heard what sounded like footsteps echoing through the empty hallways. My heart raced as I stopped to listen, but the sound abruptly faded. I shook my head, trying to convince myself that it was just the old building settling. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It felt as if a pair of unseen eyes were following me wherever I went. My co-workers were cordial, but they seemed reluctant to talk about the strange occurrences. Whenever I brought it up, they would quickly change the subject or give me vague answers. One of them hinted at previous assistants who had quit abruptly, claiming they had seen things they couldn't explain. My curiosity grew, but so did my apprehension. Despite my growing unease, I pushed forward, telling myself that I needed to focus on my work. However, the feeling of dread hung over me like a dark cloud, and every creak of the floorboards made my heart race. It was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore the sense that there was something more in the morgue than just the bodies. I found myself glancing over my shoulder more often, wondering what else I might uncover in this unsettling place. One night, I was alone in the morgue, preparing the bodies for the next day's autopsies. The silence was thick, and the atmosphere felt charged, as if something was about to happen. I tried to focus on my tasks, but an uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. As I cleaned the instruments, I suddenly heard faint whispers echoing through the autopsy room. My heart raced, and I paused, straining to listen. At first, I thought it might be one of my co-workers playing a prank, but the morgue was empty. The whispers grew louder, almost as if they were calling out to me. I cautiously stepped toward the source of the sound, my pulse quickening with each step. As I entered the adjacent room, I was met with an unsettling sight. The surgical tools I had just organized were scattered across the counter as if someone had used them while I was away. A chill swept over me, and I tried to convince myself that my mind was playing tricks. I took a deep breath, dismissing the incident as an overactive imagination. But just as I was about to leave, I noticed a shadow shift in the corner of my eye. I turned sharply, and my blood ran cold. There, on the autopsy table, a body that had been prepped for cremation was sitting upright, staring directly at me with unseeing eyes. My mind raced, and I stumbled back, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. Panic surged through me, and I blinked hard, hoping that it was just a trick of the light. But when I opened my eyes again, the body remained in its unnatural position. I bolted from the room, my heart pounding in my chest. I sprinted through the hallways, desperately seeking the exit. As I ran, the whispers echoed in my ears, growing louder and more frantic. It felt as if the very walls of the morgue were closing in on me, and I couldn't escape the sense of dread that clung to me like a shadow. In that moment, I realized that whatever was haunting this place was very real, and I was trapped in its grip. The events of that night haunted me long after I left the morgue. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stumbled upon something far more sinister than I had ever imagined. I knew I needed answers, so I began digging into the morgue's history, hoping to understand the dark secrets hidden within its walls. I spent my breaks searching through old records and newspapers, piecing together a timeline of the morgue's past. It turned out that this place wasn't just a site for autopsies and grief, it had once been the center of something much darker. I learned about a former coroner who had been rumored to perform strange rituals using the bodies of the deceased. According to local legends, he believed he could communicate with the dead, summoning their spirits for his own purposes. As I read more, I found accounts of former assistants who had reported terrifying experiences. Many claimed they heard voices and saw shadows moving in the corners of their eyes, but those stories had been buried to protect the morgue's reputation. The more I uncovered, the more I felt a chill creeping up my spine. It was as if the very essence of the place was alive, and it fed off the fear of those who entered. One evening, as I pored over an old journal, I discovered that several assistants had mysteriously vanished after working here, their fates never explained. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. Had I unwittingly stepped into a trap set by something far beyond my understanding? It became increasingly clear that the spirits of the deceased were not resting peacefully. They were trapped here, lingering and feeding on the energy of the living. The weight of this knowledge settled heavily on my shoulders. I couldn't help but feel that I had been drawn into something I wasn't prepared for, and with each passing day, the grip of the morgue tightened around me. The whispers that had once seemed like distant echoes now felt like warnings, and I knew I needed to confront whatever was lurking in the shadows before it was too late. On my last night at the morgue, the air felt thick with anticipation, as if the building itself was aware that this was my final shift. I had decided to confront whatever presence was haunting the place, determined to end this torment once and for all. Armed with the knowledge I had gathered, I steeled myself for what was to come. As I moved through the dimly lit hallways, I felt a growing sense of dread. The whispers returned, wrapping around me like a shroud, urging me to turn back. But I pressed on, determined to face the entity that had haunted me since I first set foot in this place. I made my way to the autopsy room, the epicenter of my earlier encounter. The moment I stepped inside, the lights began to flicker violently, plunging me into moments of darkness. Each time the light returned, the shadows seemed to twist and warp, and I could feel a presence lurking just beyond my vision. I called out, my voice trembling as I demanded the spirit to show itself. Suddenly, a figure began to materialize in front of me, its form shifting and indistinct. It was a grotesque silhouette, a swirling mass of darkness that seemed to pulse with malevolence. My heart raced as I recognized the face of the former coroner, twisted with rage and despair. I knew then that this was the entity that had trapped so many souls within these walls. Fear surged through me, but I forced myself to stand my ground. "Why are you here? What do you want?" I shouted, trying to keep my voice steady. The spirit let out a chilling wail that echoed through the morgue, sending shivers down my spine. It lunged toward me, and I stumbled back, the shadows wrapping around me as if trying to pull me into their depths. Just as I thought I would be consumed by the darkness, I recalled the stories I had uncovered. I understood that this entity thrived on fear, and it needed to be confronted with courage. I took a deep breath, summoning every ounce of strength within me. "You cannot control me," I yelled, my voice firm. The entity paused, the shadows wavering around it as if my words had struck a chord. I took a step forward, forcing myself to face the darkness head-on. "You are not the master here. You are trapped just as much as those you've tormented. Let them go." In that moment, the figure let out a final anguished cry before dissolving into the air, the oppressive weight lifting from the room. The whispers faded, replaced by an eerie silence. I felt an overwhelming sense of relief wash over me, but I knew that the memories of this place would linger long after I left. As I exited the morgue for the last time, I turned back for a final glance, hoping that the souls trapped within could finally find peace. I stepped into the night, the air feeling lighter than before, but I understood that the darkness would always be a part of me, a reminder of the horrors that can dwell in the most unexpected places. When I first got the call about an assignment at the local morgue, I thought it had to be some kind of joke. My usual work as a journalist didn't exactly involve corpses, but I had been looking for something different, something that would set me apart. The editor told me they wanted a behind-the-scenes look at the place, an inside view of life and death, he'd said. I wasn't sure how much life I'd find there, but the idea intrigued me. The morgue wasn't far from the city center, tucked behind a hospital that had seen better days. When I arrived, the staff seemed friendly enough, though there was an odd tension in the air that I couldn't quite place. After being shown around, one of the assistants, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, mentioned a body that had recently come in. He called it peculiar, but didn't elaborate. I asked a few more questions, but he quickly changed the subject. I should have taken that as a warning. Curiosity got the better of me, as it always does, and I knew I had to see this body for myself. I was finally led to the cold storage room where they kept the bodies. The temperature dropped sharply as soon as I stepped inside, and a strange, heavy feeling settled over me. The assistant didn't say much as he opened one of the storage units and pulled out the drawer. I'll never forget the sight. The body looked human, of course, but there was something unsettling about it. The skin was pale and covered in odd markings, almost like symbols, etched across the chest and arms. They didn't look like tattoos, more like scars, but not from any injury I could recognize. I couldn't tell if they were intentional or not, but they gave off an eerie vibe. As I stood there taking notes and snapping a few pictures, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't just the markings. It was the way the body seemed off, like it wasn't entirely at peace. That's when I heard it, a faint whisper. At first, I thought it was the assistant, but when I looked over, he was gone. The door to the room was closed, and I was alone. My heart skipped a beat. The sound had come from near the body, but no one else was there. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks, but the longer I stayed, the heavier the air felt. I decided it was time to leave. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the body. The symbols, the strange feeling in the room, and especially the whispers, I couldn't let it go. I told myself it was just the stress of a new assignment, but deep down, I knew something was off. So, against my better judgment, I went back to the morgue. It was late, and the place was almost empty. I convinced one of the night staff to let me in, promising I'd only be a few minutes. I just needed more time with the body, more answers. The air felt colder than before, and the silence was deafening. As I stood in front of the storage unit again, my hands felt clammy, and I hesitated. But I had come this far, and turning back now wasn't an option. I slid open the drawer, and there it was, the same body, the same markings. But this time, something felt different. The symbols seemed darker, more pronounced, as if they deepened overnight. As I stared, trying to make sense of it, I heard it again. The whisper. This time, it was louder, clearer. My heart pounded in my chest as I looked around the room. No one. I was alone, just like before. But the sound wasn't in my head, it was real. I could feel it in the air, like it was pressing down on me. Then something moved. It wasn't much, just a slight shift, but the body wasn't lying completely still anymore. It was subtle, almost like a twitch, but I saw it. I stepped back, my breath catching in my throat. Something was very, very wrong. Panic surged through me as I stumbled backward, my mind racing. I had to get out of that room. The whispers grew louder, swirling around me like a chilling breeze. It felt as if the very walls were closing in, and I could barely catch my breath. I turned to leave, but felt compelled to take one last look. In a moment of desperation, I quickly scanned the records on the nearby desk, hoping for some context about the body. My fingers trembled as I flipped through the pages. What I found sent a jolt of fear through me. The name of the deceased was linked to a series of unsettling incidents, disappearances, strange rituals, and unexplained phenomena. The more I read, the more I realized that this body was not just an ordinary case. It belonged to someone involved in the occult, someone who had dabbled in practices that should have remained buried. The details were chilling, recounting how this individual had reportedly died during a ritual gone wrong. I felt a wave of dread wash over me. I remembered the markings on the body, symbols that weren't just for show. They were part of something darker, something that had drawn me into its web. As I tried to process this information, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The whispers morphed into indistinguishable voices, each one overlapping the other. I could no longer tell if they were warning me or beckoning me closer. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but a part of me was rooted to the spot, fascinated and terrified at the same time. Just then, a cold gust of wind blew through the room, and I felt a presence behind me. I didn't dare turn around. Instead, I focused on the records, desperate for answers, but the words blurred as panic overtook my senses. I needed to escape this place, but the more I learned, the more I realized I was in over my head. In that moment, I made a decision. I had to get out of the morgue, no matter what. As I turned to flee, I felt a rush of cold air that sent chills down my spine. I could hear the whispers now, almost like cries, pulling me back as if trying to keep me from leaving. I raced down the hallway, heart pounding, my breath coming in quick gasps. The exit felt impossibly far away. I glanced back over my shoulder, half expecting to see the body sitting up, or something even worse. But there was nothing, just the oppressive silence of the morgue. As I burst through the door and stumbled into the parking lot, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me, lurking just out of sight. I drove home in a daze, hands shaking on the wheel, replaying the night's events in my mind. The body, the mockings, the whispers, they all haunted me. For weeks after, I couldn't shake the memories. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those symbols and felt the weight of unseen eyes watching me. I started to have nightmares, vivid and terrifying, where the body would reach out, calling my name. I tried to forget, to move on, but the stories from the morgue lingered. It was as if I had awakened something dark that wanted me to remember. I couldn't escape the feeling that I wasn't the first to encounter the peculiar body, and I wouldn't be the last. Others had crossed paths with it too, and their fates were just as grim. Now I share my experience, hoping to warn anyone who dares to tread too close to the mysteries of death. Sometimes, the secrets buried in the shadows aren't meant to be uncovered, and some bodies are better left alone.